To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejados de
This
las puertas.
here's a wild ride in the wilderness.
Indoors change.
So today on Miles from Main Street, I'm going to spend some time talking about Walt Disney's history. Before we get into that, Mikhailo is off one more week. He just returned from his trip to Disney World, and he had a great time, and we will talk about that next week. So make sure you tune in next week to hear about his trip. If you guys are enjoying the show, it would really help us out if you go out, share this with somebody you know, let them know how much fun you're having listening to the show. As you guys may know, I have a great affinity for Walt Disney history. When I first started digging into his history, I wanted to know his early life, what he was doing prior to becoming famous, prior to building this empire that he created, what brought him to that point. And that's what gave me an interest in Marceline. So if you guys go back a few episodes back in May, you'll see some episodes about Marceline, Missouri, and what we got to do there. It was a very pivotal point in his life. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm talking about his military background. So there's a legend out there, and we're going to dive into what the truth is behind this legend. I lent out Bob Thomas's biography on Walt Disney. Now, this is the biography that's been accepted by the Disney family. It is the smaller of the two main biographies out there. The other one is the Neil Gabler biography. That one's a little more controversial, and it was sourced for that PBS documentary done back in about 2011. So there's information in there you can check out too if you want to go see what that's all about. But I'm here to help figure out if this legend was true. So my friend was out reading this biography and talking to a friend, and that friend said, "Oh, does it mention how Walt Disney was dishonorably discharged?" And she brought this up to me in passing one night when we were visiting, and I said, "Wow, I don't recall that." And I was a little preoccupied with other things that evening, so I couldn't really give a good answer. But it stuck with me. After that, it stuck with me, and I wanted to look into it a little more. And I do recall some information from reading the biography. It's been a few years now about his service prior to building the company in 1923. So I went looking and found that, yes, there is something that happened, but let's dive into it. So before we can really dig into this, I think we need to go backwards a little bit and look at his upbringing. He lived in many different areas. Chicago is where he was born. Marceline is where he went to next. He spent some time after that in both Chicago and Kansas City. And during this time, he always lived with Roy. And he got to watch, as he was growing older, Roy go off to the military. He was 17 when he left. Roy was 17. And, Walt even got to go visit with him. And in fact, when he was visiting, Walt was almost shipped out as he was mistaken as a recruit. And Roy actually stopped and said, no, he's only 15. He's my brother. He can't go. Well, Walt desperately wanted to serve. He was a tremendous patriot. If you're aware, he does have a big love for Abraham Lincoln, has had that since he was a young boy. And that just builds into his patriotism for this country. So he really wanted to serve. He has a friend at the time that learned that Canada would take boys younger than 17. So this friend of his and Walt decided they were going to run for the border of Canada and enlist there. Well, the friend's mother found out about that and decided, no, you're not doing that. called up Flora Disney and said, this is what they have planned, and the plans are stopped. Well, this wasn't going to deter Walt from enlisting somehow. He still wanted to get over there and help in this effort. So his friend, this Russell that he was working with, he also found that the Red Cross Ambulance Corps was accepting volunteers as young as 17. The problem here is that Walt was 16. And to be able to enlist, you would need your parents to sign an affidavit. Elias immediately said, "No way, I am not signing a death warrant for my son to go help out in this war effort." Well, Flora realized that her son was not going to give up so easily, and she agreed to sign. What Walt did not tell them is that he wasn't old enough. So after Flora had signed the affidavit, he changed the date of his birthday. Instead of it reading December 5th, 1901, it read December 5th, 1900. Now, the cool thing about this is that the archives actually has this form, and they will bring it out on to display once in a while, which I think is pretty awesome that we're able to actually see this piece of artwork that he had done to forge his name. This is not the first time he's done this. He did it so that he could get paper routes. He's done it to get jobs with newspapers when he was first starting out. A different time, I guess. But he did it, and he enlisted. They went to Camp Scott near Chicago and started learning how to take vans apart, put them back together, how to drive in rugged terrain. And then he got the flu. This is back when the big flu epidemic in the early 20th century was around. And because of its impact on the country, they sent him home. And Flora took care of him, even though she also had the flu. And so did his little sister, Ruth. And so he was home for a couple of weeks and finally got over that and was able to return. And when he got back, the war had been declared over. Well, he still wanted to go. They did need some people to go over and help with the withdrawal of the troops. So he was chosen as one of 50 people that they needed to send over. And so he got to go. And this is where, he was very much looked at as a resource, an asset to the Red Cross. And he took drove generals around while he was there. And at one point, it was February, and something happened. Walt had done some interviews for the Saturday Evening Post. The writer Pete Martin conducted those interviews. There is audio of those available. I am going to read in Walt's words an excerpt of that interview. This is where the legend kind of starts. So this is Walt's words. It was in February. They sent me with a white truck. I was the driver, and I had a helper. A white truck loaded with beans and sugar to the devastated area in Soissons. Well, I went out of Paris, and it started to snow. I got up part way, and I burned out a bearing on the truck, close to a watchman's shed. So, the orders were never to leave your truck. Sugar and beans were gold. So the helper was supposed to go, and I'd stay with the truck. There was this little watchman's shed, and I sat with the watchman. I sat 2 nights, and no help came. So the 3rd day, I was so tired, so sleepy, that I left my truck, and I walked up to this town and ordered a meal. Then I got a bed, and I flopped into this French bed, and I slept clear around the clock. And then I went back, and my truck was gone. I didn't know what had happened. I got a train into Paris. When I got into Paris, I found out the story. This helper got into Paris and went out that night before he reported to the headquarters. and got drunk, and he was drunk for 2 days. Then he finally reported, and he came to find me. I was gone, and he picked up the truck, so I was court-martialed, which he can't actually be court-martialed because he wasn't in the military. They brought me up before this board, and the greatest disgrace would be to be kicked out of the Red Cross, you know? Then this fellow that I had worked for came to my defense. He was almost like my attorney. He said, "Look, this boy sat there for 2 nights. What happened to the helper?" he said. "Have you court-martialed the helper?" they said. "Yes, he was in the brig." So they let me off. Well, that's, Walt's specific style, but basically what happened, he was facing serious charges of abandoning his vehicle because the food was so scarce. And I'm reading this last paragraph here from The Vault of Walt, Volume 3, written by Jim Korkis. If you ever get an opportunity to read Jim's work, all of his Vault of Walt books are just amazing. He tells some great stories. So this paragraph is right in the middle of page 8. Walt faced serious charges of abandoning his vehicle because food was so scarce that people were stealing any food they could find. A friendly sergeant spoke on his behalf that Walt had done all that was physically possible by remaining with the truck for those 3 days, and that after all, Walt was only 17 years old. The review board of officers agreed, and no discipline was imposed. Walt's assistant, that helper, he landed in the local guardhouse. So this is where legends have some sort of basis in truth. Walt was in the Red Cross. He was not a part of the U.S. military. In fact, after this incident, Walt was actually offered jobs for 3 times as much pay as he was getting to work in other areas of the of Europe where they were getting the troops home. He turned it down because he was so homesick. But this is not. So he was never dishonorably discharged, as the legend goes. He was actually court-martialed, if you would, which even in the Red Cross, that's not the appropriate term here. But he was never let go, and he was able to move on and could have served longer had he wanted to. I think that's very important to note here that the stories are that he was dishonorably discharged, but that never anything like that had happened. This legend is continued on in many military ranks. A lot of times on tours in the Pentagon, you'll see people giving those tours, and they'll mention Walt Disney, to new recruits being dishonorably discharged. And it just kind of perpetuates it. And, back to that friend of mine, she had said that he was a military veteran, and he was told this legend as well, as a matter of being fact. So let's dive in a little bit more to his patriotism. Back in World War II, when that came along, the Disney studio was clipping along. We've already had Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs come out. And he had a group of animators working for him at that time. And then Pearl Harbor was bombed. This is when the U.S. government was looking to station a presence in California in case the Japanese decided to come at the mainland. And they found that the Disney Studios was a good place to do that. So they took over the space, having to give up offices to the higher up officers, and providing space for them to store, weapons, vehicles, what have you. And this was a difficult time because it pretty much shut down production for Disney. But he was able to keep his animators working at this time because he found that he wanted to help the effort. So they started creating training videos that the military could use. So they created these videos and donated them to our country. This is just another example of how patriotic Mr. Disney was. So you might hear some of those negative things out there about Walt, but when it really comes down to it, he really did care about his country, and he wanted to help, and he found ways to do that. Going back to being in the Red Cross, if he could have waited one more year, he never would have served, probably, because the war would have been done. So I think this really shows how tenacious he was. He wouldn't take no for an answer. It really started at a young age, when he was trying to find jobs, when he was trying to get into the military, or any way that he could help in the effort. He would do whatever it took. So I often think about this when we look at some of the projects we lost when he died, specifically Epcot. As much as we love Epcot, and Mikhailo just loves Epcot, it's his favorite park. It's something that, and I think about this every time I'm on the People Mover and I see that model of the Epcot that could have been along that trip. I think about it every time, like what could have happened had Walt stayed alive longer and was able to complete that project. Would it have failed? I mean, that's how it looked for everyone. Every single project that Walt wanted to do, they said it couldn't be done. There's no way. You look at the loss of Oswald and the Lucky Rabbit. Charles Mintz thought that he had this guy. He was done. I've got his animators. I've got his character. There's no way he's going to recover from this. But the tenacity of Walt didn't let that stop him, and he kept going. He wanted to be in the military. He did that. He wanted to create a movie about dwarfs, a long movie, not just a short. And they said it was Walt's folly. And he completed it, and it made the company enough money to make a few more pictures and continue going. He wanted to build Disneyland. Again, it's a Walt's folly type of thing. There's no way he's going to do this, to the point that Roy told him he could not use Mickey Mouse. That iconic garden right in front of Disneyland as you walk in, that was not there in the original plans. Roy told him he could not use it. It only became part of the park when it was already successful. Roy finally said, "Okay, kid, go ahead." And, that was protecting the brand that is Mickey Mouse. So, these are some of the examples through his life where he was so tenacious in what he did. And I keep using that word because I just feel like it's the right word in this case. He just wanted to complete everything. So I look at Epcot and I wonder, what could have been? He was out to serve the great urban dilemma, and he didn't get that opportunity. You look at Walt Disney World, and Mikhailo and I have had this conversation on the show that, they've built an entire city there. Not just the parks, but everything surrounding it within their improvement district. That is all a city. And, you could make the argument that they've built that on their own there. I don't know that it solves any of those urban problems that Walt was looking to complete. But what could have been? And so I'll leave you with this. In part of my research for today's show, I came across an article on the WDW radio website where somebody was talking about Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and finding Disney, and I thought that was interesting. And it spoke a little bit about nose art on planes. In case you're unaware, Oshkosh, Wisconsin holds one of the largest aviation get-togethers in the nation, and they get many, many great exhibits there. for every year for this convention. And this particular article was talking about some of the Mickey and Minnie nose art that was done on these planes. Walt did some art of his own while he was serving in France for the Red Cross. He would put paintings on these trucks that were being driven around, and to the point that people were asking him to do it. He was doing drawings of different things. There is a famous photo of him standing by his truck with a drawing on the truck. I can't remember if it was him or who it was, but it's an interesting little drawing on there, and that's part of what he was known for within the Red Cross service group. So again, it just all these different nods that you can see to what ended up building this man, and I hope you guys will go on out and let people know that despite some of the negative things that are going around with the company and with Walt, that he really was a positive figure for this country. He really was somebody that you can look at for inspiration. And I try to do that all the time. I try to find ways to see what Walt's done to keep me driving through certain things, whether it's my job, my kids, my hobbies, this podcast, whatever it may be. I think that he is a great source of inspiration. So anyway, that's all I've got for you guys this week. I hope you had a good time, and as we always say, some live close, but others don't. So let's talk about it.